Welcome to Plato's Cave. I'm Jordan Myers, and I'm a master's student in philosophy at the University of Houston. You're listening to a reading group episode of the show, which means that in this episode, I discuss the paper Alternate Possibilities and Moral Responsibility by Harry Frankfurt. So this is a part 7 of the Moral Responsibility and Free Will series, and this is a continuation from the last episode. So this paper was written in 1969, which was before the paper we did last episode in 71. But in this paper, Frankfurt discusses and concludes that the principle of alternate possibilities, or the idea that one could have done otherwise, is not required for moral responsibility, contrary to what many people, including myself, actually thought in the beginning of this series. So it's funny, in this episode, I am rather obstinate about the magnitude or the impact or the power of Frankfurt's point here, and I owe it to Adam, who really stuck with the point and continued to hammer it home. He really kind of changed my mind about the importance of this, and it doesn't even show up very much in this episode specifically, but just over the course of the series, I begin to really absorb what the power of this paper says for alternate possibilities and moral responsibility. So with that introduction, I hope that you enjoy our discussion of Frankfurt's PAP. Okay, so the paper name that we're covering, I guess it's like a Frankfurt Part 2 essentially, is Alternate Possibilities and Moral Responsibility. And this was referenced in the paper that we previously did, and he referenced it in some way to sort of, I can't remember what concern he said was explained by this. Do you remember, Adam? It was like a footnote.
Yeah, it was just, the concern of the inability to do otherwise.
Yeah.
So.
And he said, see my earlier paper, because this was 69, and the other one we read was 72. So, yeah. And I guess, Adam, you didn't like this paper.
I liked it more upon the second reading.
Okay.
Yeah, because I kind of read it late at night, and I thought that he wasn't addressing like core concerns, but I thought he actually did in some ways. So I thought there were some interesting things to come out of this.
Yeah, I think he addressed some core concerns, but I'm not sure that I agree with him, even though he did address them. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm also not 100% sure if I understand what he thinks or not yet. We'll have to see.
Sure.
So, okay, so we're all on the PDF. I'll just kind of read like a few tabling quotes if I can. So in the first paragraph, he says, he's introducing this principle of alternate possibilities. He says, this principle states that a person is morally responsible for what he has done only if he could have done otherwise. Hence, that's the alternate possibilities part. Its exact meaning is a subject of controversy, particularly concerning whether someone who accepts it is thereby committed to believing that moral responsibility and determinism are incompatible. Now, I have a note upon my first and only reading, unlike Adam, that I say yes. So if I do accept what I understand the principle of alternate possibilities to mean, then I do think that moral responsibility, at least in a deep sense, and determinism are incompatible. Now, I think that he explicitly says that this is not the case in his view. It's funny, he actually just says in the second paragraph, but the principle of alternate possibilities is false. I love how he states it as like false. It's not just like, this isn't the metric, like this is what it should be about. He's like, it's false. He says a person may well be morally responsible for what he has done, even though he could not have done otherwise. Which that is something that, like, just at the start, I'll put on the table that, like, I am opposed to. Like, it's hard for me to imagine in what sense you could be deeply morally responsible if you could not have done otherwise. But obviously, he tackles this question. Okay, let me read a few more quotes from section 1, and then we'll get started. He says, In seeking illustrations of the principle of alternate possibilities, it is most natural to think of situations in which the same circumstances both bring it about that a person does something and make it impossible for him to avoid doing it. These include, for example, situations in which a person is coerced into doing something, or in which he is impelled to act by a hypnotic suggestion, or in which some inner compulsion drives him to do what he does. Now, this is actually something very similar to the course guard thought experiment that we talked about. I guess not published, but like where the device is implanted in your brain and it controls your actions. That would be a very straightforward instance of compulsion, or the lack of being able to do otherwise. He says, however, this is second paragraph. However, there may be circumstances that constitute sufficient conditions for a certain action to be performed by someone, and that therefore make it impossible for the person to do otherwise, but that do not actually impel the person to act or in any way produce his action. Now, a person may do something in circumstances that leave him no alternative to doing it without these circumstances actually moving him or leading him to do it. So that seems like he was talking about like a Strawson type 1 plea, excusing conditions as opposed to exempting conditions, something like that. And so he lays out his aims in the paper. He says there's basically, from what I understand, 3 aims. He says, I propose to develop some examples of this kind in the context of a discussion of coercion, and to suggest that our moral intuitions concerning these examples tend to disconfirm the principle of alternate possibilities. Then I will discuss the principle in more general terms, explain what I think is wrong with it, and describe briefly and without argument how it might appropriately be revised.
And just to clarify, the situations that he's describing there, it wouldn't quite be a type 1 plea.
I guess you're right. Actually, it would be more type 2.
Well, it's more cases where a person would act. I mean, he's going to get into that case, with like, but it's all about a person not being able to do otherwise. Yet the kind of coercive effect isn't the reason that they're doing it. So
yeah. So this was a question that I had. It was kind of a lingering question. Does he kind of equivocate on 2 senses of could have done otherwise? Like, is there is he collapsing a distinction between type 1 and type 2, please? Or is he only focused on one? Or that's what I couldn't really understand about this paper.
So lay out for me again type 1 and type 2, please, so I can fully answer this question here.
So I'm recalling from the Watson paper. Type 1 pleas, I think Watson says, are excusing conditions or excusing pleas. So it was like, don't blame me for being late. There was an accident on the road and I couldn't have gotten around it. So excuse me from moral responsibility, but exempt it. So type 2 pleas would be exempting cases. So don't blame this person for what he did. He had a brain tumor pressing against his amygdala. He couldn't control his emotional impulses. And so he should be exempted from moral responsibility.
Okay. All right, I feel like I've got this down here. So let's kind of go through that again real fast here, because I don't think it's either.
Which is weird, because what else is there?
So I think it's very careful with the language here. So he says, however, there may be circumstances that constitute sufficient conditions for a certain action to be performed by someone, and that therefore make it impossible for that person to do otherwise. There might be some other force there that ensures that the person can't do otherwise, but that force does not actually impel the person to act or in any way produce his action. So he acts for a different reason than that. It was going to happen regardless.
Yes.
Make sense?
What I read that sentence as saying is that determinism is generally true, but what we're interested in is that a person could be determined to do something, but not compelled to do it. He's making a distinction between determinism being true versus someone being compelled to do something.
I don't think he's getting into that quite yet. I think he makes that distinction a little bit later with with determinism, like because he does bring up like causal determinism later on to when he adjusts like kind of rephrases the could have done otherwise.
Yeah.
But I think we should hop right into the interesting case that he brings up because like with like the Mr. Black character.
Well,
that
wait,
Jones 4?
Jones 4, yeah.
Should we actually explain Jones 1 through 3 before we do Jones 4?
We can, but that's the interesting one that he builds up to. But yeah, we can explain the other ones first.
Yeah. I think we should do it for like the listeners, but for us too.
Sure.
So wait, I had another kind of like tabling quote that I wanted to read. He says the principle. So basically, the principle of alternate possibilities is saying that like the sense in which someone could have done otherwise is what's relevant for moral responsibility. I'm understanding that right, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So he says the principle of alternate possibilities may in this way derive some credibility from its association with the very plausible proposition that moral responsibility is excluded by coercion. Contrapositive is if you're coerced, you're not morally responsible. He says it is not right, however, that this should be so. So he's disagreeing with his own principle that he put forth. Not his own, but like he put forth this principle and he's disagreeing with it. He says, the fact that a person was coerced to act as he did may entail both that he could not have done otherwise and that he bears no moral responsibility for his action. But his lack of moral responsibility is not entailed by his having been able to do otherwise. Now, just like off my initial reaction to that is like, I disagree because I don't know, like this might be just some brute intuition I have, but like, I mean, I remember when we started this topic is like, I do kind of hinge moral responsibility on like the capacity to do otherwise. Like,
I mean, I think the thing is that like, it's hard for us to bring this up without bringing up Jones 4.
Okay.
So the thing is like, it's not that I think you're ultimately wrong, but I actually do agree that the phrasing does need to change of that statement actually, based on the Jones 4 case.
Okay, so I'll explain Jones 1 through 3 then. So Jones decides there's this person Jones, and he decides for reasons of his own to do something. Then someone threatens him with a very harsh penalty, so harsh that any reasonable person would submit to the threat, unless he does precisely that, and Jones does it, so he acquiesces to the threat. Will we hold Jones morally responsible for what he has done? Now, he says that, it's very plausible to say that we shouldn't. He says one possibility is that this is Jones 1. One possibility is that Jones 1 is not a reasonable man. He is rather a man who does what he has decided to do no matter what happens next and no matter what the cost. In that case, the threat actually had no effective force on him, so he was going to do it anyway. The threat is kind of this secondary thing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change his action. That, he says, is not a counterexample to the principle of alternate possibilities because he was a man for whom the threat had no coercive effect. So that's not exactly, that's kind of the first case. Then he says, another possibility is that Jones 2 was stampeded by the threat. Stampeded, he was coerced basically by the threat. He was overrun by it. And so he says the fact that at an earlier time Jones 2 had decided for his own reasons to act in just the way that may be relevant to an evaluation of his character, he may bear full responsibility for having made that decision, but he can hardly be said to be morally responsible for his action. So this one is the one wherein Jones is actually motivated by the threat, even though he would have performed that action regardless. But because he was motivated by the threat, he's not morally responsible for his action, but he was morally responsible for the decision that he made. I hope I'm explaining that clearly, because that actually makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. And so now he comes to a third possibility. Jones 3, he says, was neither stampeded by the threat nor indifferent to it. The threat impressed him as it would impress any reasonable man, and he would have submitted to it wholeheartedly if he had not already made a decision that coincided with the one demanded of him. In fact, however, he performed the action in question on the basis of the decision he had made before the threat was issued. When he acted, he was not actually motivated by the threat, but solely by the considerations that had originally commended the action to him. How is a little bit of exegesis here? So it says the threat. Okay, let me read that again. It says the threat impressed him as it would impress any reasonable man, and he would have submitted to it wholeheartedly. So he would have been motivated by the threat if he hadn't made a decision that already concluded. Oh, so I get how that's supposed to be different from the first one. So he had reasons to do it, and in the first one, the threat was irrelevant. But in the third one, it was relevant because he would have been persuaded by that.
Yeah.
How is that different than the second case?
From our perspective,
the second case was a little bit different than what you said it was. Because the second case, he was stampeded by the threat. Given that threat, he would have performed that action regardless of what decision he had already made.
Oh, so it wouldn't have deterred him, basically.
Yeah, so like this overrides the decision he already made in Jones 2.
Yes.
The threat does.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I explained it wrong. I confused Jones. Yeah, you're right. So Jones 2 is like it has no bearing on him, and he goes against the force of the threat, right?
Jones 2 was he was stampeded by the threat.
So, I'm sorry.
So given that threat, he would have performed that action regardless of what decision he had already made.
Okay.
So the threat upset him so profoundly, moreover, that he completely forgot his own earlier decision and did what was demanded of him entirely.
Yeah. Okay. So I almost imagine these as almost different Joneses entirely. It makes it a little bit easier. Like the Jones 2 is the type of person that like just submits to threats immediately. Whereas like the other Jones that we're talking about is one who like,
Jones 1 just doesn't give a fuck. Yeah. He's just
Jones 1 is just like literally like a sociopath.
Yeah, Jones 1 is like kind of like he makes hay or whatever. Like what's that saying? Like he just doesn't care what like the system said. Like he just
gunpoint keeps walking.
yeah, like basically he's undeterrable.
Did you ever see the one video of that guy who was like drinking at the bar and like someone like held a gun to his head and he just kept drinking and then like
so like he's the Jones 1.
Yeah, Jones 1.
Yeah, and the guy like I forget exactly how the video went, but the guy like I don't know, tried making him like, get on the ground like everybody else, and the guy was just like tugging on the gun as it was like at his head. The video's crazy, but that's what it reminded me of. It's a Jones 1. Like he seriously just didn't care.
He was gonna drink Jones 1.
He was gonna continue drinking at the bar, like no matter what coercion was there.
So Jones 2 then he stops drinking, he gets on the ground.
Yeah.
And Jones 3 was neither stampeded by the threat nor indifferent to it. So he just responds to the threat sort of like, so he's just saying like, all things being equal, I'd rather not get shot in the head, but it's kind of like a calm deliberation, I guess. That's
like
the difference.
Someone who is susceptible to a threat, but is not by definition going to submit to a threat. So I always had to interpret these as like what type of person Jones is.
Okay.
As opposed to like the circumstances. That made it easier to me. I don't know.
Let me read this. Let me read this again. In fact, however, he performed the action in question on the basis of the decision he had made before the threat was issued. When he acted, he was not actually motivated by the threat, but solely the considerations that had originally commended the action to him.
So he doesn't act because of the threat, but it's part of the calculus. Like he recognizes the threat.
Okay.
So
he performed the action in question on the basis of the decision he had made before the threat was issued. I don't understand how that makes sense, though. If the threat hadn't been issued yet, how is he kind of taking it into the calculus?
I think what it means is like he had previously decided that he was going to do this, and then like when the threat appeared, he's like, okay, well,
he's someone who's previously decided that if someone points a gun to my head, I'm going to get on the ground and stop drinking instead of finish the drink. Is that what you're saying?
Actually, that's not how I thought about it, but that might be correct. Adam, do you have any comments?
I think that example doesn't work as well, like the gun to the head. This might be more like,
But he could have a generalized case of it.
Yeah, but the thing is that person might, it's hard to imagine a gun to a head, the person not either being one or two.
True.
You know
True.
what I mean? Like, because the thing is, like, you're either gonna like acquiesce.
Oh, how about this?
And
I've
like,
got an example.
no, but I'm saying,
sorry.
yeah, I'm saying like there are many examples, like, say like in politics, if you had planned to vote on a certain bill, right? But then the threat was made. You recognize the threat, but you still vote the way you were going to vote on the bill. You know what I mean? Like, you've taken the threat into account, but it doesn't actually affect the way you're going to vote.
Okay,
So,
I get it.
So
I get it.
Yeah.
Or technically, isn't it conceivable that it actually could have? Oh, well, that actually goes to the fourth case. So never mind.
Good transition, though.
Yes. Okay. I understand. I was a little hazy on the actual distinctions between the three Joneses. So, okay. Okay. He says, let me just read this one thing. He says in the case of Jones, the case of Jones 3. I'm sorry, this is top of section 3.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. The case of Jones 3 may appear at first glance to combine coercion and moral responsibility, and thus to provide a counterexample to the doctrine that coercion excuses. It is not really so certain that it does so, however, because it is unclear whether the example constitutes a genuine instance of coercion. You know what? That I didn't know exactly what he meant by that, but now actually with our examples I do. So if he actually does acquiesce to the threat, we are not sure if it was true coercion or if it was just this was his rational deliberation. He decided kind of like, into the calculus it goes, and so this is the outcome. In the same way that you might just kind of work around like any like opportunity cost even, or kind of like startup cost. Like I understand that it will cost X to be able to do this, so I'm okay with it. Like I wouldn't prefer to do that. Like if this conference is in Jerusalem, like the flight cost is not something that I'm happy about, but I'm not exactly coerced to pay.
You view it as a cost.
Exactly.
You recognize it as a cost.
Exactly. It's a threat of sorts in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think I understand that now. So I wanted to like do this one other thing about this. So he says, suppose we decided to say that Jones 3 was not coerced. Our basis for saying this this is second paragraph, will clearly be that it is incorrect to regard a man as being coerced to do something unless he does it because of the coercive force exerted on him, which makes sense. That's intuitive, at least.
Yeah.
On the other hand, suppose we decide to say that Jones 3 was coerced. Then we will be bound to admit that being coerced does not exclude being morally responsible. Now, that latter part is something that I still disagree with, even though we'll get into it. So I guess I fall into the former camp where he's not coerced. Is it clear? Like I'm not fully understanding what Frankfurt would say though. Like which does he think it is?
I think he definitely falls on the side of the first case, right? Like based on like how he finishes the paper, like it's. True. He's definitely more of a first case where he's saying like, okay, that person is not coerced if they're acting, with respect to the threat, but not because of the threat.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So
yeah. I guess I get the distinction. It's a little slippery in my mind, but I still get it. I get it, but it's like all I'm doing is just kind of wondering like, what does it actually mean to like. Do you get what I'm kind of going at? Like, what does it mean to actually be kind of moved by the threat, but not coerced by it? Like, if the threat, so in both cases, if the threat weren't there, you would do something different. But it's like, in one case, it's like you're overcome with kind of like, it's like a reflexive fear of it. And the other one, you just take it into your considerations, which is like, I get that there's an important distinction there. But it doesn't seem to be a distinction about like what kind of freedom or deservingness of like, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, I know like your more fundamental issues with it, but I think the distinction made is like completely fair though to say that like, okay, if this person was going to, act the same with or without the threat,
yes,
then
totally different.
Yeah, so I think the distinction makes sense there. So
Like I actually do. I'm starting to see how this paper connects with his later one a bit, with the alignment of sort of the orders of the desire.
especially how it finishes, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Like the final paragraph, like literally is connected right with So
Okay. So he says, whichever we decide to say, then we will recognize that the doctrine, this is the next paragraph, that the doctrine that coercion excludes moral responsibility is not a particularized version of the principle of alternate possibilities. I wasn't sure what I thought about that. So he says, so we'll recognize that if we say that coercion excludes moral responsibility, which I'm prone to agree with, that's not an instance of the principle of alternate possibilities. Does that seem to be directly if coercion excludes moral responsibility, wouldn't it exclude it precisely because you couldn't do otherwise? I didn't understand why he had that sentence. Like, it doesn't seem to me that whichever we say, then that's true.
Let me read this again here.
Yeah.
Read this, the follow-up sentence. That might help clarify.
Situations in which a person situations in which a person who does something cannot do otherwise because he is subject to coercive power are either not instances of coercion at all, or they are situations in which the person may still be morally responsible for what he does if it is not because of the coercion that he caused it. I wrote next to that sentence, how did he show this? I wasn't sure that what he laid out actually did show that.
Well, I think we should move into Jones 4 now, right? Because the thing is, like, he's kind of beating around the bush, but I think like that's the most interesting part of this. So,
okay. I had more notes, but maybe we can come back to them then. So, Adam, why don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's touch on those notes before we get to Jones 4, but let's move past this paragraph and then maybe circle back if we want to. You know what I mean? Because
sure, I kind of do want to though, because I don't understand. Insofar as I might disagree with him, I think it kind of has to do with this. Like, I just don't know that he has showed this yet, but I don't know. Okay, well so if we circle back, we circle back. Adam, I'll let you go through Jones 4 then.
Okay, sure. Let me get to that.
Because I'm not gonna lie to you guys of the audience. I miscalibrated the amount of time that I should have devoted to reading this, so I was a little bumping up against my deadline, being 8:30. So yeah. I did read it, but I'm not sure that I understand it as well as I usually do.
All right, so let me actually read Jones 4 so we can kind of just go through it again,
yeah,
and then I'll give my interpretation of it here.
Let's do that.
Sure.
Okay, so I'll start at kind of the bottom of page 834, but he said, I do not propose to consider in what sense the concept of could have done otherwise figures in the principle of alternate possibilities, nor will I attempt to measure the force of the objection I have just described. For I believe that whatever force this objection may be thought to have can be deflected by altering the example in the following way. Okay, so here's Jones 4.
Can I say something real quick first?
Yeah, go for it.
I had a note next to that very sentence you started where I said, I think this is the crucial issue. Because he says, I don't propose to consider in what sense the concept could have done otherwise figures in the principle of alternate possibilities. That's, I don't know. Like, to me, that might be the crucial part of this thesis, what role it does play. Because someone like Dan Dennett and I would really disagree about what the sense of could have done otherwise means. Like Dennett would say, could have done otherwise. All we mean by that is the colloquial sense of it, basically. Like, it's the sense in which when you're at a stoplight, you could make a right or you could make a left. There's nothing impossible or kind of prohibitive about either of those options. Whereas I want to maintain that, like, no, like you could, like, if you make a right and we rewind the universe exactly the state it was in and nothing randomness wise changes, no, you couldn't have done otherwise, actually. So that, like, I don't know, like, maybe I know we want to get to the Black 4 case, but
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Jones 4.
Well, no, but like I think like when like listening to like the Jones 4 case here, what you have to do is you have to go into it like this. Let me think of the best way to put this.
All right, prime me for it.
Yeah, I gotta prime you for this here. Okay, so um I don't want you to set aside, or actually you probably should set aside kind of going into this here, like any ideas of like causal determinism in causa sui. Okay.
Okay.
So
So we've moved from the deep sense of moral responsibility into now we're debating shallow senses.
for now, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So let's actually like I'll read the story here, or this case.
Yeah.
Okay. So suppose someone black, right, the name's Black. I should have paused there.
The race bears on the moral responsibility.
Yeah, I should have paused there.
You missed that hyphen there.
Yeah. Suppose someone black, let us say, wants Jones 4 to perform a certain action. Black is prepared to go to considerable lengths to get his way, but he prefers to avoid showing his hand unnecessarily. So he waits until Jones 4 is about to make up his mind what to do, and he does nothing unless it is clear to him that Jones 4 is going to decide to do something other than what he wants him to do. If it does become clear that Jones 4 is going to decide to do something else, Black takes effective steps to ensure that Jones 4 decides to do, and what he does do, what he wants him to do. Whatever Jones 4's initial preferences and inclinations, then Black will have his way.
Yeah.
So let's make sure we're all on the same page with that part right there.
Yep. Yep.
So
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jones can't do otherwise in this scenario.
Because if he happens to already be doing the thing that Black wants, good, Black doesn't interfere. If he's about to do the thing Black doesn't want him to do, Black will interfere. So either way, Jones is going to do the thing that Black wants. Now, I'll just say actually for like listeners and for you guys, this paper was actually the latter paper had a little bit to do with it, but this paper is really the one that launched the Frankfurt case subliterature. There are like variations upon variations of these, trying to show different things. But I just thought that would be of interest to some people. So continue.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of get why now, because I think I find this one pretty interesting. So what steps will Black take if he believes he must take steps in order to ensure that Jones 4 decides and acts as he wishes? So he kind of just goes on for a little bit talking about like, potential ways that Black could influence Jones, and we can kind of create any way we want to. Like we can say that it could be like the Paraboom scenario in which, someone literally, Black has the ability to, change the neurophysiology of Jones such that Jones acts in the way that Black desires, right? So it could be very much a physical change to the very essence of Jones.
What do you think about, I have heard people argue this before. I've read a variation of this where people actually say that the crucial, so I'll let you, so basically, Adam, explain to us the upshot of this. Like, what is this saying about moral responsibility?
So like, this isn't saying anything about moral responsibility yet. This is this is talking about could have done otherwise.
Yeah, true.
So let me actually get to the relevant part there.
Then I'll say so here's my take on this so far.
Okay.
So far, I think that this difference, whether Jones does what Black wants of his own volition, let's say, or whether he does it via influence by Black. I think that distinction, so it's hard for me to say this because you asked me to move from the deep end to the shallow end of moral responsibility, but like I find that says, because remember, when I view shallow responsibility, I'm viewing it in terms of almost like evaluations of persons. Right?
I think the problem is that I think this paper could actually really be like beneficial to like your argumentation here, because I think actually that like in this case, Frankfurt actually demolishes the argument of the could have done otherwise, and I'll tell you why. Because the thing is, so I'll just kind of jump to the chase here. So, okay, let's imagine someone. When we have to posit these things first, right? Mm-hmm. So let's imagine someone could be causa sui, right? Because the thing is, causa sui, people not being causa sui, is already if you
buy determinism,
if you acknowledge that fact, then in any sort of deep sense, then we're obviously not moral, responsible morally entirely, mm-hmm. right?
Sure.
But let's actually set that aside for a second, right? Okay. So imagine that we also set aside causal determinism for a second.
Okay. So we're just reserving judgment on that. Yeah.
Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. I kind of got cut out there for a second. Okay, so we've set aside both of those things, right? Causal determinism and causa sui.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so now we're just going to examine somebody's actions in the context of,
locally.
Could have done otherwise. Yeah. So the point of Jones 4 is that when analyzing moral responsibility on Jones's part, in this case, Jones acts in such a way that Black never has to get involved, right?
Yeah.
So there's no coercion in that sense,
mm-hmm.
right? And so let me also just read something else here because it's kind of hard to. It made sense when I read it, but I want to keep Let me read this part too. The example is also flexible enough to allow for the elimination of Black altogether.
Where is this?
This is at the bottom of page 836.
Okay.
So the example is also flexible enough to allow for the elimination of Black altogether. Anyone who thinks that the effectiveness of the example is undermined by its reliance on a human manipulator who imposes his will on Jones can substitute Black, a machine programmed to do what Black does. If this is still not good enough, forget both Black and the machine and suppose their role is played by natural forces involving no will or design at all. Okay. So I want us to actually do that. I want us to actually replace Black with just natural forces plus randomness.
Is that not bringing determinism back into it? Isn't that just what determinism is? Random forces plus randomness?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. But I think hang on, I'm starting to phone call.
I'm sorry, natural causes versus randomness.
Yeah, but so the idea here is that when examining Jones 4, he's going to do what he wants to do. He's
going to do what he wants to do if it aligns with what he's supposed to do as defined by whatever is controlling his actions, whether it be Black or a machine or natural forces, right? But if he's going to go against what he's supposed to do, then things will intervene.
Yes. But it's if we set aside the coercion in this sense, he would still be, there's still a sense of moral responsibility for him doing what he does, even if there's no coercion acting upon him.
In which case is there still more responsibility? In the case where he does it by himself, or the case in which he's influenced?
The case in which he does it by himself there.
See, I agree with that. But I don't know that I see it I don't know if I agree for the same reasons as Frankfurt does.
See, honestly, this one's really hard because this made complete sense to me, but skipping from paragraph to paragraph has made it now a little less comprehensible. Let me if Giffen, if you have anything to say right now, or Jordan, I'm gonna kind of look through and see if I can find some meaningful quotes.
If you want to just read it, that's okay. I'm
we can go back
okay.
Good with that, yeah.
Okay, let's do that then. Let's try to make sure we're on the same page here.
Yeah.
Okay, so All right, so I'm going to start here, okay?
Where's here?
This is going to be on 836,
Okay.
second paragraph there.
Okay.
All right, so now suppose that Black never has to show his hand because Jones 4, for reasons of his own, decides to perform and does perform the very action Black wants him to perform. In that case, it seems clear Jones 4 will bear precisely the same moral responsibility for what he does as he would have borne if Black had not been ready to take steps to ensure that he do it.
Yeah, that's totally intuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that checks out.
Yeah.
Okay.
It
would be quite unreasonable to excuse Jones 4 for his action or to withhold the praise to which it would normally entitle him on the basis of the fact that he could not have done otherwise. This fact played no role at all in leading him to act as he did. He would have acted the same even if it had not been a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, everything happened just as it would have happened without Black's presence in the situation, without his readiness to intrude into it. So, let's see here.
So, is there more that you're trying to find right now?
Yeah, I want to find more relevant parts here that really had like an impact on me, because the thing is, like, it's not to say like kind of like my takeaway from this.
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to like verbalize it at least, but it's not to say that there's any sort of ultimate moral responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the argument of could have done otherwise, like at least from this paper, it kind of showed me that you actually need more to bolster that argument. Actually, the argument of could have done otherwise itself fails, but you need the idea of like, okay, you have to introduce causal determinism. You have to introduce, the fact that we're not causa sui. You have to introduce these other variables. The argument of could have done otherwise, could not have done otherwise, does not work on its own. Because you can imagine situations in which, you couldn't have done otherwise because like there was a force like Black,
mm-hmm.
But you still acted.
I think I get it. Yeah. So, okay, I actually don't disagree with you at all, but I have a different emphasis.
Okay.
If I'm understanding you correctly. So like, it's weird. Like I hope I'm not being like pedantic, but it's weird. Like I agree with everything Frankfurt says, but it doesn't change my mind about much. But I also don't know if it was supposed to. Like so let me explain that. Clear. So I buy hook, line, and sinker his intuition that Jones 4 will bear precisely the same moral responsibility for what he does as he would have borne if Black had not been ready to take the steps to ensure that he did. I totally buy that. However, I feel like let me explain, I guess, this way. So the gold standard would be like causa sui born moral responsibility, right?
Sure, but you just had to introduce that. So the argument of like, but continue,
yeah.
Just continue.
So that, but no, it's a good interjection. Like, so that's totally true. So like the deep sense of blame is not warranted, right? So now we've moved into like we kind of table that to dismiss it because it's just not possible. Now we're into the realm of moral responsibility qua reactive attitudes, right? So this is like now this is where I think the concerns about moral responsibility are adjudicated in light of interpersonal relationships and or consequentialism, right? Consequentialism evaluated kind of by like the types of persons, right? So all of these compatibilist like the accounts of moral responsibility, I think they're like super interesting and they're super valid. And what I don't know if I disagree with Frankfurt about or not is I think that they're super useful and super valid and super interesting for the shallow end, right? I can't grok whether Frankfurt thinks that they are relevant for everything though, like the deep and the shallow sense.
I mean, I think he does believe that this applies in a deep sense. But the point is though that like I do agree with Frankfurt is that like if you're talking about like moral responsibility, I don't think that the argument of could have done otherwise is a good argument on its own. Like I like actually the way that I mean he actually disagrees with this later on, but I like the rephrasing of let me find that there's a certain the revised principle of alternate possibilities will entail on this assumption concerning the meaning of could have done otherwise that a person is not morally responsible for what he has done if it was causally determined that he do it. But he doesn't believe, however, that this revision of the principle is acceptable, and he goes into that. But I do agree that, you know, the could have done otherwise on its own doesn't actually like hold a lot of weight. And I feel like, because like you can imagine, like if you don't introduce causal determinism and you also don't like introduce like causa sui, and you just like analyze like someone's behavior on its own, then
it's not enough. You're right.
No, it's not enough. Like it should.
I just don't buy that those ifs should. Like I guess so. Maybe I agree with him in the sense that like if you say if we don't introduce these things, then this is what's relevant. I agree, but when you say if we don't introduce those things, you've moved me from the deep to the shallow end of more responsibility, which I'm not trying to like degrade the importance of the shallow end. Like it's like shallow is just like our demarcator for it, but like the shallow end is where all the work gets done.
No, I disagree with that still, because I still think like fundamentally that like say like in a debate about, you know, free will or moral responsibility, right? If you said for me it really impacts me like the idea of couldn't have done otherwise, then I think that's poor phrasing, because then you have to then you have to absorb the Jones 4 case. Yeah, well, you have to like introduce other things what you mean by that. But because the thing is like he's brought up an example of which someone who has like different foundations of like, you know, of what they like if someone doesn't accept causal determinism, right? And they don't accept like the issue of like causa sui.
So they're a libertarian, in other words.
Sure. And they say like, okay, we have an example right here of someone that couldn't have done otherwise, right? Because otherwise Black would have intervened. Yet we could still judge them for their actions because these are actions they wanted to do anyway. Yeah.
Wouldn't you not be a libertarian in that case then? If you're admitting that Black or the versions of Black could compel him, aren't you not being a libertarian then?
I don't know what you mean by that. I might be talking past each other.
Well, so I'm saying
either.
Okay, let me explain it. Because like so, Frankfurt said that like Black could intervene somehow, and we go from very pedestrian ways to very complicated ways of how he could intervene. Right? He could like hit him with a car and stop him. That's kind of the most brutish way, right? Or he could kind of slip something into his subconscious in his dreams or something like that, right? That's kind of like a middling case. And then he could actually control, like actually a modern version of this case is one that's like Course Guard. So Black implants the device in Jones's head, but he doesn't turn it on unless he needs to, right? So that could be on the farther end of the spectrum where it's like Black has this device, and as long as he does what Black wants, he doesn't turn the device on, but he could turn the device on.
Well, right? That's what he's doing right now. That is Jones 4. That is the case.
That's what I was explaining. I've lost my train of thought. What was the question that you had asked me? Libertarian. Okay. But then Frankfurt walks that back even further, right? So the whole point that he's making is that you don't even need Black to be an agent, because people could and people have actually honed in on that part. Like it's only a suspension of moral responsibility if an agent is controlling your actions. If it's not an agent, then it doesn't have anything to do with moral responsibility. But if it is an agent, then that suspends it. So Frankfurt wants to stay away from that objection, and he says, okay, I don't care if Black So he sets up a spectrum between black and basically I'm reading him as saying determinism, right? But that's what I'm saying, that so a libertarian could accept that a device implanted in your head could determine your actions, but for some reason a libertarian would stop somewhere on that spectrum and say once you get to determinism, it's either not true or you can overcome it, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, like, I totally understand what you're saying there.
Mm-hmm.
But just imagine like how this debate would go, okay?
Yeah.
Like for like if you said for me, like the fact that you can't do otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that you couldn't have done otherwise here really does it for me in terms of moral responsibility. And then someone brings up this case specifically and says,
Yeah.
you know, yes, but you know, I believe that, you know, people should be judged based on, you know, their actions. And in this case right here, you know, they had the choice to choose. And although the outcome would have been the same in both cases, this person, ultimately chose to do this action, even if the outcome was predetermined.
Explain what you disagree with me on then, because I would say, yes, that's absolutely true. That's a great way to evaluate the type of person that he is.
No. Because you would then change your argument at
How?
that point. You would then introduce the fact that, you know, a person is not ultimately responsible for who they are, for their environment, and you would start going into that. You would no longer like stick on that line because someone just brought up an exception to that high level argument. You know, or maybe like, you know, switching, it could be a low level argument, but someone just brought an exception to that, which has now pushed you back. Doesn't make you wrong, but it makes you now have to like point to deeper issues with the idea of moral responsibility.
But I don't see that as an exception if you grant that you're operating in the shallow sense of moral responsibility. Like it's only an exception if you think that there aren't two ends of the pool, right? Like, isn't it only an exception if you only think there's one sense of moral responsibility? Like,
I don't know what you mean by that. Sorry.
You're raising it as an exception because you're saying, no, when I introduced the Jones 4 case, it's making you being me retreat to the deeper level. And you're saying that constitutes a contradiction, and I'm not sure it does.
Okay. I get what you're saying now. No.
Yeah.
I think the issue is like you haven't fully addressed, you know, someone that has like said that there is. So if I were to say like there was ultimate moral responsibility.
Oh, okay.
And
wait,
if I am making that claim, there is ultimate moral responsibility. You say no, and then you say for me, the fact that you can't do otherwise.
And you bring up this as a case. Yes,
I bring up this as a case. You have to retreat to other arguments.
No, I get it. I totally get it at this point.
So yeah,
I would say that okay, I get it. Actually, that clicked for me there. The sense of could have done otherwise, then I think is being equivocated on slightly.
I think no. I think like the causal determination actually, like that's why you've kind of had to change like the phrasing of it.
But I'm not sure that you do, because like you're right. Could have done otherwise is it's a broad term. Like it's fuzzy, right? If by could have done otherwise, I mean vitiating in the deep sense. What if I just say that like because could have done otherwise is a more generalized and sloppy version of saying whatever happens, it happens because of determinism plus randomness, right?
No, but you might not want to change your language, having not been exposed to, you know, like this case in particular right here, because this case now causes you to actually like say, actually, what I mean specifically is causal determinism.
Okay,
you know what I mean? Like rather than
like,
you know, more of a general could not have done otherwise.
That's fair enough. Maybe that's so. That's why I wasn't really seeing this as like I was in a weird position when reading this, because it's like I agree, but it doesn't actually change kind of like my view.
No, that's why I think this paper is actually really good now that because the thing is like it doesn't vitiate your argument in a deeper sense, but it says that actually the language isn't as specific as it should be if you're going to make that claim.
Okay.
Because you actually have to, you get what I'm saying.
I buy that. I buy that then. So when I say could have done otherwise, I need to specify that what I mean is that whatever happens because of determinism plus randomness, and that vitiates a global sense in which you could have done otherwise, while there are clearly local senses in which that distinction does not cover everything we need to know for moral responsibility.
Yeah, I would say that sounds fair.
Okay.
What's up, Giffen?
I was just going to say, like, upon my first and only reading before this discussion, I basically came out of this paper and was like, you may as well have just said that Frankfurt had like some qualms with like the definition of coercion and
no, but I think it's deeper than that. I actually do now. I think it's deeper. Yeah.
Do you get my point now that I was driving for there?
Yes, I do. I didn't mean to interrupt Giffen, but I do.
But Giffen.
I mean, kind of. I don't know. I just don't see it as like. I wouldn't call this a great paper, like after like discussing, but I understand a little bit deeper like what he was trying to go for. I think.
I find it funny that Adam, you went from this isn't relevant, we shouldn't discuss it to this.
Because my first reading was your reading.
Yeah.
I was just like, I don't see in any way how he actually. But then I read it again. I'm like,
that's funny how you read it late at night and I read it under a time constraint.
Yeah, and you come away and you're like, how in any way does he address like, the idea? But it's like, actually he does, because you shouldn't actually use this language. People can find counterexamples to
I actually get it. So here's my question. I wonder, I think that point that you summarized him as saying is a very nice point. Is that all? I'm just wondering, is that all he means? Is it merely...
No, yeah. He goes further.
Okay.
Because I think...
let's see if we can land on that further. That was my question.
Yeah, let me...
There's, at the top of section 5, there might be a nice quote. He says, the fact that a person could not have avoided doing something is a sufficient condition of his having done it. But, as some of my examples show, this fact may play no role whatever in the explanation of why he did it. I want to see if this note is still true under my new understanding of it. I said, yes, exactly. No freedom, but very different types of people, but he's looking at it through the lens of free will or moral responsibility. Do I still agree with that note? The fact that a person could not have avoided doing something is a sufficient condition of his having done it. Duh. The first sentence is admitting determinism is true, right? Then the second sentence, but as some of my examples show, this fact may play no role whatsoever in explanation of why he did it. Yeah, which is the local sense of moral responsibility. So I agree with that quote. Right? What? Because help me find the further part of it then, Adam.
I honestly, he completely explodes in the final paragraph. The
final paragraph.
The final paragraph. I mean.
Wait. Can I read a quote on page 837?
Yeah.
Before we get to the explosion,
which I do want to see.
1, 2, 3 paragraphs down, first sentence. This then is why the principle of alternate possibilities is mistaken. It asserts that a person bears no moral responsibility. That is, he is to be excused for having performed an action if there were circumstances that made him impossible for him to avoid performing it. Okay, so the principle is mistaken. I don't know if I would say it's mistaken. It's fatally unspecific, as stated by could have done otherwise, right? Because I'm taking his point to be a hermeneutical point, but if he wants it to be more than that, then I might disagree there. So if he's saying that could have done otherwise could both be applied to admitting that determinism plus randomness is true, and it also can be a type of could have done otherwise, like in the Black case or the Jones 4 case, then you're meaning two different things. You need to be more specific about at least one, if not both of them, right? I actually have fully come around to that point. I agree. So then I would say that the first case of could have done otherwise, I should say that whatever happens precisely because of determinism plus randomness, and nothing can override those two causes. Wherein the second sense of could have done otherwise is a pragmatic kind of pedestrian sense, not to degrade it, because I actually don't think that that's a less important sense. Which is like
you pretty much cut out like that little like exchange you'd have.
Damn.
Like no, I'm saying like
you didn't. You're saying my connection cut out.
No. I mean like you'd pretty much like cut out that little exchange you'd have if like you raised, the fact that you can't do otherwise. You know what I mean? And someone say, well, how about in this circumstance? You say, well, that's. But what I truly mean is this.
Yes. You're right. You're totally right. Actually. I actually don't think that has anything to do. This won't be relevant to the listeners because we didn't post that last episode. But like, did you say that you think this has to do with Adam? I think I take what you were saying is this has to do with my overall view on this, but it doesn't have to do with my writing sample. Okay.
Yes, because whenever you and I like or on the podcast, you've said like for me, what does it is like the fact of couldn't do otherwise. You know what I mean? It's like he's like kind of change your wording on that a little bit.
And I still think that, but I think it differently now. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I agree. Because I just wanted to clarify that because I wasn't seeing how this was exactly relevant to my writing sample, but
no, it's not.
No. Okay. Okay. One more quote, and then we'll let you explode. So he says, 838, 1, 2, 3 paragraphs down. Suppose a person tells us that he did what he did because he was unable to do otherwise. Or suppose he makes the similar statement that he did what he did because he had to do it. We often accept statements like this, if we believe them, as valid excuses. Skipping down, we understand the person who offers the excuse to mean what he did, to mean that he did what he did only because he was unable to do otherwise, or only because he had to do it. I actually think that that's a very nice distinction. And it goes to, I think I mentioned to Adam, but maybe both of you, but maybe just Adam, I can't remember. David Pizarro did that really interesting social psych study where people automatically assume that in unethical cases, like if I walk into a bar and punch someone, people automatically assume that your second order desire didn't endorse your first order desire to punch the guy. But when I give money to someone on the street, a homeless person, they assume that my second order desire did align with my first order desire. So I felt empathy and I wanted to feel empathy and I had the second order volition to have that empathy be effective. So they attribute more responsibility in the alignment case, and they're reluctant to attribute it in the misalignment case. So I take it that he's hinting, this is kind of a prelude to that distinction, right? Where he says, we understand the person who offers this excuse to mean that he did only what he did only because he was unable to do otherwise. So he's almost hinting at this, like he didn't have the second order desire to do it, but the implications of the situation were such that his first order desire, he kind of had to do it or something like that, right? Adam, you're frozen.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
The tension is just building too much.
Am I still frozen?
No, you're good.
All right. I mean, I heard what you were saying. That's how I agreed with all that. Yeah.
Okay. I just I want to see if I read that right. All right. So Adam, I'll let you do his last paragraph then.
All right, the last paragraph, he kind of just he probably should have expanded more on this, but all right. So the following may all be true. There were circumstances that made it impossible for a person to avoid doing something. These circumstances actually played a role in bringing it about that he did it, so that it is correct to say that he did it because he could not have done otherwise. The person really wanted to do what he did. He did it because he really wanted to do. So that it is not correct to say that he did what he did only because he could not have done otherwise.
Yeah.
Under these conditions, the person may well be morally responsible for what he has done. On the other hand, he will not be morally responsible for what he has done if he did it only because he could not have done otherwise, even if what he did was something he really wanted to do. So I think we got to break that down.
I agree.
Like heavily. Like that was.
I agree.
That's quite a sentence paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what I take that to be meaning. I actually see this paragraph as very clearly introducing what he talks about in his later paper that we covered.
Yeah.
I very clearly see that flowing from this paragraph. I feel like I can see the kind of inklings of that second paper in this part specifically. So Here's let's take it part by part. He says the following may all be true. Okay. There were circumstances that made it impossible for a person to avoid doing something. That is saying, for my sanity, determinism plus randomness is true, right? Okay. He says these circumstances actually played a role in bringing it about that he did it. So it is correct to say that he did it because he could not have done otherwise. He's saying that that's basically just reaffirming that determinism is causally true, right? Like we understand causality correctly, right? So then he says that he just shifts gears entirely in the second part. The person really wanted to do what he did. So he had a second order volition for his first order desire. Not the language for that's not in this paper, but he did it because it was what he really wanted to do. So that it is not correct to say that he did what he did only because he could not have done otherwise. So he's saying it's deeper than could not have done otherwise. He had a second order volition that endorsed it. And he sees that as a deeper issue for more responsibility than could have done otherwise. And he says, under these conditions, the person may well be morally responsible for what he has done. Because on Frankfurt's view, what matters is the second order volition and its alignment with the first order desire. I'm assuming, right? I see the seeds planted in this paragraph. He says, on the other hand, he will not be morally responsible for what he has done if he did it only because he could not have done otherwise. Even if what he did was something he really wanted to do. Is that a contradiction? What the hell? On the other hand, wait, let me read that again. On the other hand, he will not be morally responsible for what he has done if he did it only because only because he could not have done it. The only plays a big role in that sentence. He should have italicized the only. Only because he could not have done otherwise, even if what he did was something he really wanted to do. On the other hand, he would not be responsible.
I feel like
that's the biggest only in the entire paper.
Wait, hold on. If he only did something because he couldn't have done otherwise, what does it mean to say that he did it? He was something he really wanted to do. Isn't that's contradictory, isn't it?
Well, they may be a first order desire.
Oh, but not a second order volition. I see.
I really think that this is like introducing second order desires and volitions, honestly, and that's the compatibilism he's kind of driving at here. Do you
get what I'm saying though about the I'm not actually quibbling with that point, but the way he phrased it sounds weird. So he says, this is the last sentence, he will not be morally responsible for what he has done if he did it only because he could not have done otherwise. So that makes it sound like it's not something he wanted to do, right? If you do something only because you couldn't have done otherwise.
Yeah.
And then he adds, even if it was something he really wanted to do. So it's like you both want and don't want to do it. Maybe that's just he's drawing out the second order, but I don't know.
Let's see. Let me read this.
Doesn't that just sound like a weird contradiction?
Yeah, let me read this part again here.
He exploded too much in this last because it's I actually don't disagree with him, but I just don't understand that sentence. I'm just trying to parse that sentence.
Yeah, that sentence is pretty interesting. We actually have to see if it actually makes sense, because it's the cause of why you did something, right? So in the first, he introduces in the beginning of the paragraph, just doing something because you really want to do it, even if you couldn't do otherwise.
In the beginning of the paragraph? Oh, that's sorry, that's more of the middle. Are you saying the person really wanted to do? Because in the beginning, he's admitting that determinism plus randomness is true, and that it's causal, right?
All right. Let me actually look in the paragraph here. So, so there were circumstances that made it impossible for a person to avoid doing something. These circumstances actually played a role in bringing it about that he did it. So it is correct to say that he did it because he could not have done otherwise. Okay.
So he's saying that determinism is true and it's causal. Okay.
Yeah.
Then the middle part.
The middle part. The person really wanted to do what he did. He did it because it was what he really wanted to do. So that it is not correct to say that he did what he did only because he could not have done otherwise.
I totally agree, but he's just talking on the two different planes, right? He's talking globally and locally. Like he's saying as an, oh, I think I got it. He's saying as when you ask, oh, I think I got it. I think I got it. When I ask Adam, why did you go to the mall today? The answer I'm not looking for is because my neurons fired in such a way that was causally determined by the radiation of the sun plus the genetic. Like I'm just looking for what you wanted to buy at the store. Like, so he's saying it's like a level of explanation almost, right? So he's asking like, the person really wanted to do what he did. He did it because that's the role that because is playing. So like, why did you go to the store? You did it because it was what you wanted to do, right? It's understanding why people live their life in the way that they live it, right?
Yeah. No, I think we're on the same page here.
Because if I ask you, like, Adam, why, like, oh, you went to Dick's Sporting Goods, like, why'd you go there? And you're like, you give me this, like, like deterministic thesis about, like, we've done studies on your brain or whatever. It's just like no, but I was just curious, like, what did you want to buy? You know what I mean? So he's saying
is that how he's using that here? I'll be frank, I'm not sure.
How else is he using it though? He did. The person really, because this is weird. Because like honestly, the middle part of this sentence had nothing to do with the rest of the paper. I mean, I can clearly see how it relates to the freedom of the will and the concept of a person paper, but it comes out of nowhere for this paper. Like he didn't talk really about like. Well, I mean, I guess he did with like what Black wanted to do, but I don't know. Like Adam, is that like, am I stretching the interpretation of that too far? Like I thought that's kind of what he meant.
Yeah, Adam, I really want to hear your thoughts here because it seems like a stretch to me, but I could easily be misunderstanding this paragraph sentence.
I don't know what else that could mean.
So, I mean, with this one, like, let me actually try to like kind of collect my thoughts here because I think what he's driving at is what he's introducing in the paper we read, the last paper we read, where it's like, okay, it does deal with second order desires, and if you're acting because of second order desires, because of those, if those are actually influencing action.
Volitions, yeah, second order volitions.
Yeah, second order volitions, yeah. So then at that point, you could say that, not only are you acting because you couldn't have done otherwise, right? Because you can't do otherwise, but you are acting also with respect to second order desires. So as introduced earlier in the paper, so you can act in a way that the conclusion is the same, but the action also aligns with second order desires.
He's saying both levels of analysis can be true at the same time.
Yeah. So let me see if I can actually like try to like.
Was my example not good? Like I thought that was exactly what he's saying.
I think like. You weren't getting quite to like the second order desire of like, okay, aligning with what you really want, right? It's not just what you want, it's what you really want. Like
I wanted to go to Dick's to get like a new pair of shoes, and I'm really happy with being the type of person that's like into collecting shoes.
Sure. So like in that case, let's see here.
Because he's like, I really do think it's the level of analysis. Because he's saying, because remember, he talked about, I can't remember the exact language he used, but he said something about like, there's an explanation versus a cause, or it was like something like that. I can't remember his exact verbiage, but a cause. He's admitting that a cause of you going to Dick's to get a new pair of shoes is determinism plus randomness. Like he's saying, yeah, that's true, but he's also saying an explanation of what you did is because you wanted shoes and you were okay with that. You had a second order volition for that desire to be effective. And that's where he sees more responsibility. So he's like a deep compatibilist about this, where I'm just a shallow compatibilist about this. Right?
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up.
Ahead, Giffen.
I was going to say, I wanted to bring up, and I've been waiting. Hopefully this is a good time. The sentence before the last paragraph says, or I guess the previous two, with like him stating what the principle of alternative possibilities should be replaced by, which is basically just a rephrasing of what we mean by alternative possibilities. Then it also says this principle does not appear to conflict with the view that moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. So, Jordan, you mentioned that again in the last paragraph that unless I misunderstood you, you were saying that Frankfurt was saying that, determinism is true.
He's admitting that it is, yeah. That sentence, this principle does not appear to conflict with the view that moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. Yeah, compatible means they're both true. So like determinism is true and moral responsibility is true. Okay. Yeah.
I feel like I really get what he's saying right now, but it's like hard for me to like rephrase it in a sense.
I'm disappointed that my phrasing wasn't enough for you.
No, I feel like I definitely am starting to align more with Frankfurt in general, although I'm not. I still need to think a lot more about this because it's like. Yeah. So let me just kind of try to like think out loud here. So he's saying like, okay, if let's set aside for a second because I don't think his ultimate moral responsibility addresses causus sui. So let's set that aside, right? You don't choose who you are, right?
He just doesn't even reference it, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll set that aside for now. But in terms of like desires, though, if there's gonna be a predetermined outcome either way, right, to behavior, but sometimes that behavior is something you endorse, and sometimes it's something you don't endorse.
As per last episode, yeah.
Yes. So behavior that is done on the basis or is done for reasons of like second order endorsement plus just simple kind of like causal determinism, you kind of have like two things going on there in the sense that you would have done this even if it weren't the predetermined outcome. This is something like intrinsic to you that you endorse. So even if
wait, say that again. Sorry, you would have done this even if it wasn't the predetermined outcome.
If it's something intrinsic to you that you endorse, like so.
I understand the latter part, not the former.
Yeah, isn't the former part denying that determinism is true then?
No, not at all. Either I've
rephrase it.
Yeah, either I must have. Yeah, that's
must have said something real weird then. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so let's imagine like, it's, I don't know, you're doing some sort of moral action, right? Like
volunteering for the poor or whatever.
Yeah, volunteering for the poor. Sure. Okay. So, you didn't like obviously like cause
your desire to give to the poor.
Yeah. Sure. But it's nonetheless one that you endorse and the actions of you kind of like, helping out the poor. It's like not one, it's one that would have happened either way, whether one that it could have been causally determined, but it's also an action that you endorse. So even if it wasn't causally determined, you would have done it anyway.
That doesn't make that I'm with you until the last part. What do you mean by even if it wasn't causally determined, you would have done it anyway?
Yeah, so
do you not agree that seems to be committing you to contra-causal free will at that point? So because the thing is like you have to imagine that like a conception of contra-causal free will and say that okay, if you posit this, right? Like if you posit contra-causal free will, okay,
you still would have chosen that action, right? Because it's one that you endorse.
Yeah, but then I don't understand exactly. What do you drive? Say it again. It seems like it's incoherent because it's like it's saying I don't. But maybe I'm misunderstanding you. Say it again.
I want to hear another question first before I explain it again. Maybe to like try to. So Giffen, go ahead.
Are you saying that even people who actually do believe that like there is such a thing as contra-causal free will would accept that a second order desire would be an endorsement. Is that like what you're getting at?
No, I don't think.
No, not quite with that.
No. Adam, I was on board with you until you said that even if it wasn't okay, let me try to rephrase you, maybe that might help.
Okay.
So you're saying that so you have this desire to volunteer for the poor, right? And that desire was causally determined in you, right? Like Frankfurt admits that. Like we're all on the same page about that. When you endorse that desire, you are. This is where I kind of lose you a little bit, but like when
but you haven't set aside causa sui. You haven't decided. You haven't set aside like the fact of like, you don't choose who you are, but
you
you're
just
acting
accept
on
the determinism. That is setting aside causa sui. You can't accept determinism, but then table causa sui.
No, I'm mixing up the phrasing here. It's you're setting aside the objection of causa sui. You're setting that objection, right? Because we're setting aside the fact that you don't choose who you are. Like you just don't.
Of course, yeah.
Sure. So, but
quick clarifying question: do you include your second order volitions in who you are? Because I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so it's like, okay, you sometimes act in ways that don't align with second order desires, right? Or second order volitions.
True.
Yeah. Okay. And
the unwilling addict.
So in that case right there, if you had complete control over your first order desires,
you wouldn't do that thing.
Yes. Right? Okay.
But that makes more sense. You phrased that as if you weren't determined to do it. Which is weird because it's like
but the point is like the more I talk, the more like refined because because obviously like I just came into contact with these ideas.
If that second order desire was one that was actionable, then you wouldn't do it, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So in that case, that's why Frankfurt's saying you don't have moral responsibility in those cases because you don't in fact endorse those things.
Yeah. The unwilling addict you're not morally responsible because you're addicted. Yeah.
Sure. But in the cases of second order volitions, even if you had control over your own wills, you would, your first order desires, you would still endorse those.
Even if you had control over your first order desires, you would still endorse them.
Yeah, if it corresponds with a second order volition.
Isn't that just saying the same thing, though? Isn't that a tautology? That's saying if you could choose your second order volition, you would choose your second order volition.
Yeah, Adam, you said if you could choose your first order desires, but are you suggesting that it's possible to choose your first order desires, but not your second order desires? Like, is that the case you're trying to clarify? That seems weird.
No, I feel like we've totally gotten bogged down here. I think there's actually like genius in this paper, but the thing is like,
I'm just not understanding what you're saying.
No, I fully understand, but it's hard to be cross-examined when I haven't fully thought through this. But but I think there is a huge distinction.
I honestly don't understand what about it wasn't brought out by my original explanation of it though. I thought that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Here, discuss something amongst yourselves, and let me try to write something down here so that I can actually have a well thought out sentence here.
Okay. I have a question, Jordan.
Okay.
So, again, forgive me if it's just a little bit late, but when we were talking about the last paragraph,
explosion.
You said, did you say that from this paper you take it that Frankfurt holds a deep sense of moral responsibility?
I think that he's a deep compatibilist, yeah.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Because that, that seemed to be slightly different than what I would have gathered from the previous sentence, which I explained, even though we both agree with it.
Yeah. So what? Well, so he's so like the the previous sentence you read doesn't tell you if he's a shallow or deep compatibilist, right? Well, actually, no. It does. It does in the sense that like he doesn't qualify that. So he says this principle does not appear to conflict with the view that moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. So
Right.
that's moral. So if you sign on the dotted line that moral responsibility in every sense that we could want that to be true is compatible with determinism, then you're a deep compatibilist. I don't sign off on that statement. I say moral responsibility in every sense we could want it to be true is incompatible with determinism because I think it vitiates a global sense of could have done otherwise. But I am a shallow compatibilist because I think that there are moral responsibility asterisks cases that are compatible with determinism qua Strawson's reactive attitudes constituting interpersonal life.
Absolutely. Right. I completely agree with your view. But to me, whenever he said in the last sentence, this principle does not appear to conflict with the view that moral responsibility is compatible with determinism.
Yeah. He seems to be establishing himself as a deep compatibilist then.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I'm taking away from this, where he's saying moral responsibility in any sense that you could ask for it is compatible with determinism. So he's saying that causa sui is like, for whatever reason, he doesn't find that relevant.
Okay. I just wanted to establish that link to that sentence because we had originally skipped it, and I was wondering how from just the last paragraph you had gotten to that.
Yes.
So that's all I wanted to clarify.
Okay.
So I think we're totally on the same page.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So then, maybe it's honestly worth, at risk of being pedantic for the listeners, let me reread the last paragraph to you and see what I think. So he says, the following may all be true. So he's saying that every sentence here can all be true without conflict at the same time.
Right.
There were circumstances that made it possible for a person
made it impossible.
Thank you. I was about to say he's a libertarian. There were circumstances that made it impossible for a person to avoid doing something. That sentence translated is just saying determinism plus randomness is true. The causes that caused you to do something were going to be there no matter if you wanted them or not. Okay. These circumstances actually played a role in bringing it about that he did it. So it is correct to say that he did it because he could not have done otherwise. All he's saying there is that determinism plus randomness is true and it's causal. So when we do things, it is because causal of determinism plus randomness. Then he switches gears super heavily. He says, the person really wanted to do what he did. That sentence means he had a second order volition to do what he did. He had a desire, and he wanted that desire to be effective. He really wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. The next sentence, he did it because it was what he really wanted to do. So that it is not correct to say that he did what he did only because he could not have done otherwise. So there he's saying, it's not true that he couldn't have done otherwise because this
had to do with the volition specifically, I think. Right.
Let me read that again. He did it because it is what he really wanted to do. So it's incorrect to say that he only did what he did because he could not have done otherwise. So there he's saying, oh, I got it. It's the incorrect, or it's not correct. That's the problem. He's not saying that determinism is true, but it's not correct. It's not enough. Instead of correct, he should say enough. He should say enough instead of correct. But it's not enough to say that he did what he did only because he could not have done otherwise, because that's not the right level of explanation, right? So if you say, like Giffen, you did something and you really wanted to do it.
Sure.
And I ask you why, and you say, because I couldn't have done otherwise. Determinism plus randomness is true. Don't you understand? That's not the right level of analysis. I'm looking for agentic personal reasons from you. I wanted to do X because of Y. And Y is a desire I have, and I endorse that desire. So when he says, so that it is not correct to say that he did what he did only because he could not have done otherwise, he's not saying, this is where I was getting hung up with what Adam was saying.
Yeah.
Frankfurt's not saying that he could have overcome determinism. All he's saying is that's not enough. That's not enough. That's not the whole picture, right? So he continues, under these conditions, the person may well be morally responsible for what he has done. That's true because Frankfurt views moral responsibility as contingent upon someone endorsing what they want to do. He thinks it has to do with the second order volition because he's a deep compatibilist. He thinks that moral responsibility, in all the senses that we could want that, is compatible with determinism. So therefore, it's not enough to say that you couldn't have done otherwise, because for him, moral responsibility has to do with your second order volition. I agree, but in the shallow sense. That's the only difference. And I hate being pedantic about that, but I think it is a deep difference, actually.
No, it is a huge difference. That's why I just wanted to clarify, because we're kind of having to like read in and like even tweak his phrasing for it to like match on to like what we know from the other paper of his we read.
Yeah.
And like tying it kind of into,
I don't know how the fuck you understand this paper, but let alone this paragraph, if you haven't read his later paper, which
that's
is
what
impossible.
I was saying. Yeah. So whenever I brought up like the previous things, I was like, Jordan, how do you know this without that knowledge? That's what I was trying to get at. Because I was like struggling to see like how like exactly it was clear from this. So I totally agree. Like if you want to understand Frankfurt, you got to read both.
When we get to the
last, in the reverse order almost.
In fact, you do. When we get to the last sentence, that's where I get lost, because he says, on the other hand, he will not be morally responsible for what he has done if he did it only because he could not have done otherwise. But that's like, I don't understand that. When you say you did something only because you could not have done otherwise, that implies that you didn't want to do it, but you couldn't have done otherwise. Like, am I crazy here? He says, on the other hand, he will not be morally responsible for what he has done if he did it only because he could not have done otherwise. Okay, Giffen. Yes. You do something and you do it only because you couldn't have done otherwise. Yes. You were compelled to do it.
Basically, we can even rephrase it saying like, I did not have the second order volitions. That seemed to be
accurate. Exactly.
Like
then he's saying you
are not morally responsible for the action.
You are not morally responsible. Oh, wait a minute.
So that does make sense. Yeah.
Wait, that does make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the qualm we had earlier with actually with like the last part.
Even. Of course, that makes sense. You won't be morally responsible if you were compelled, if you were an unwilling addict.
And the last part is the part
even if what he did was something he really wanted to do.
So that makes me translated into even if he had a first order desire. No, really does not mean a second order desire.
No, really does. Like, why would he say if he really wanted to do? He should have just said even if he wanted to do it, but he didn't really want to do it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's like really almost sounds like he's invoking a second order thing, which we can't know unless we read the second paper.
What is physically after? But even in his own verbiage, what is a second order volition if it's not really wanted? Is it really wanted?
This is why I was like so quiet, because like at this point I was like, it was like impossible to like read this and like understand even like the fourth to last word, this critical really, without having read the other paper. I was scouring back through the document. I'm like, I don't know if he like even like. Why would he hinge his literally this final sentence of the?
I'm making grammatical changes to his last paragraph. I have two changes. He shouldn't say correct. He should say enough, and he shouldn't say really. He just shouldn't have anything there. It should be wanted. Adam, we've done deep exegesis on this last paragraph. I actually think Adam, do you want to go first, or should we go first?
Let me hear it, because I kind of made a little flow chart that I feel sort of comfortable with, enough to return.
I may have verbalized the exact same flow chart, so let me walk you through it. Okay.
I was about to contradict hard.
Here's what I adjudicated. I walked myself through this like twice when you were off the thing. Okay. So I'm going to take it sentence by sentence. The following may all be true. These are all true statements that do not contradict each other, is what he's saying. Firstly, there were circumstances that made it impossible for a person to avoid doing something, i.e. determinism plus randomness is true. Second sentence, these circumstances actually played a role in bringing it about that he did it, so that it is correct to say that he did it because he could not have done otherwise. All that's saying is that determinism plus randomness is both true, but it's also causal. It actually affects the way things are, right? Okay, next sentence. The person really wanted to do what he did. Translation, he had a second order volition to do what he did. He really wanted to have that desire be effective. Next sentence. He did it because it was what he really wanted to do, so that it is not correct to say that he did what he did only because he could not have done otherwise. Now, what I change the word correct to enough, and that sentence makes total sense. It's not enough to say that he did what he did only because he could not have done otherwise, because that is the general level of analysis that doesn't tell you anything that you would be asking when you ask, why did you do something? You need to understand the person's first order desires, second order desires, and second order volitions, maybe even their third order will, right? So that's where he's saying he did it because it was what he really wanted to do. So it's not enough to say that he couldn't have done otherwise. That is true, but you need more to understand why he did something. Next sentence. Under these conditions, the person may well be morally responsible for what he has done. Frankfurt thinks that because he thinks that moral responsibility is contingent upon your second order volition, not upon the sense of could have done otherwise, which we've already gone over. Next sentence. On the other hand, he will not be morally responsible for what he has done if he did it only because he could not have done otherwise. I.e., you're not responsible if you're an unwilling addict, if your first order desire and second order volition don't align. The last sentence, even if what he did was something he really wanted to do. All I would ask is that he take out the really in that sentence, even if what he did was something he wanted to do, because the really implied to me that it was a second order volition, whereas I think he's referring to a first order desire. If my translation of him is true, then I'm okay with all of that, but all I do is just shift it into the shallow sense where he's keeping it in the deep sense. But otherwise, I agree with it entirely. Did any of that, do you disagree with any of that exegesis?
A little bit. I think it gets much deeper for me. Like,
okay.
Yeah, because it's like, okay. So let me examine.
You walk me through like linearly and what you agree with and what you don't, so I understand.
And me too.
Yeah, no, of course. So I generally agree with what you put forward there. So okay, let's examine like the actions don't align with second order volitions, because that's the easier case.
Yes, the unwilling addict, right?
Sure.
Okay.
So in this case here, it's like, okay, if higher order desires were made to be actionable, those actions wouldn't take place. If, because, let's see, because like the only cause there is the could not have done otherwise, right? It doesn't align with, what someone truly wants. Like the deeper, higher order desires of who a person is.
Can I make an example out of it to help understand it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say that someone has a first order desire to eat cake, right?
Yeah.
So they have a first order desire to eat cake, but their second order desire is to not have that be effective. They don't want to eat cake. However, they're an unwilling addict. They're addicted to sugar and they eat the cake, right?
Yeah.
Finish the analogy in what you were saying then, but keep it in the examples language if you could.
You just cut off there for 10 seconds.
So, can you finish what you were saying using my example?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So now let's talk about like the moral responsibility sense, right? Using your example there.
Yeah.
So okay, so there'd be moral responsibility because actions are endorsed by higher actionable, by higher level actionable order desires.
If they aligned, right? But in this case, so if he actually did want to eat the cake, then he would be morally responsible. But because he doesn't and he's an unwilling addict, he's not responsible? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because
okay.
Let's see. It's hard to put it in this example. Let me think about this again here.
I mean, it's trivial, but like I think it helps.
Yeah.
So if he says, am I understanding you right? Like, so he has this desire to eat cake, right? He has a first order desire to eat cake, and there's two possible second order desires he could have. he could have the desire not to eat cake, in which case he's not morally responsible because he does end up eating the cake. If he had,
I don't like this example because this is not the way I was thinking about it. Like this is like this doesn't like it's not a bad example by any stretch, but it's almost like flipping it because it's a second order desire not to do something, which is kind of throwing me off. You know what I mean?
oh, well, all I was going to say is if he has the second order desire to eat the cake, then he is morally responsible because they align and he does eat the cake.
Yeah, but I'm talking about one that like.
So you're saying that the first order desire is a no instead of a yes to do something, so he doesn't want to do?
Let's see what I write here. Given smirks at me.
I totally understand. I promise.
Yeah, I mean this
is incredibly difficult. I was trying a lot of this because like it was difficult. I understand.
Yeah. I mean, like it's really struggle to like. I mean, like human beings can only hold like what 5 to 7 things in their mind. I'm trying to like think of like multiple orders of like desires.
I know. I'm sorry. I won't interrupt. Just redo your example for me then. Or okay. You had it in a generality.
Yeah. Let me try to like actually try to. Okay, so morally responsible because actions are endorsed by higher order desires. And the outcome would be the same even if the actions could not have been done otherwise. So it's like, I literally hate when someone's trying to call me.
That's so annoying. I put my phone on silent. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, it drives me nuts. So the thing is like in this case right here, we've already agreed that there are actions which aren't endorsed by second order desires, right? But those actions only occur because you couldn't have done otherwise.
Yes, so the unwilling addict cannot do otherwise but take the drug, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But it's like there are cases in which
you could not have done otherwise, but you're still morally responsible, i.e. Black 4 or Jones 4. Is that what you're saying?
Honestly, I've gotten lost myself here. Honestly, it's like every time I get close, it's like fleeting, and I thought
I got it. I got what you were saying.
You might have, but I feel like I lost it. You know what I mean? Like it was it was like the fabric between my fingers and just like slipped through.
Can we repeat it exactly? Maybe we can catch it.
I swear to God, welcome to reading philosophy. But it's like, dude, when you're doing that alone and it slips away. That's like you consider the darkest things. Like,
no, you are just distraught with your first order desires.
When you're alone and it's frustrating when it slips away with people, but when you're alone and it slips away, dude, that's when I just turn into the void. Like I
feel the darkness.
Yes, like okay, I gaze into the void and the void gazes back at me in those circumstances. Okay, here's what I think you were saying.
Yeah, no, I think I switched halfway through because like with the moral responsibility one. It's like an action you do endorse, though.
Yeah.
Like you in fact like do endorse like whatever good thing or bad thing you're doing, like regardless. You know what I mean? So it's like, but you know,
okay.
Even if like you remove like the sense of could have done otherwise, who you are, you're still someone that's going to endorse that action.
Yes. Okay. Let me draw this out for myself and talk while I'm doing it. Okay. So the action. Okay. So. Let's do this here. So your first order desire is you want to give to the poor, right? The action that you end up doing is giving to the poor. Okay. Now you have a second order desire to want to give to the poor. Now you have more responsibility in this case because you endorse your first order desire, which translates directly into an action, obviously. Now, guide me through the next part of what you're saying. Even in a case where you couldn't have done otherwise. So let's say Black is over off in the corner, and he's going to make sure that you give to the poor.
Yeah.
Even if you don't want to.
He has the stick nearby just in case.
I actually don't know. I don't. Because so we're in a position of this is positive moral responsibility, right? Like this is positive reactive attitudes. If you don't want to give to the poor, but then Black makes you, I kind of don't think you're morally responsible. It's like, are you saying that you still are?
Let's see. You're not. No, you're not, because it's not something you endorse at that point.
Yes. Okay.
So
okay.
so the thing is, like, it, but
But you were going to no matter what.
But the thing is, like, if you endorse that behavior, but Black made you do it anyway,
Yes.
like, then you are morally responsible.
What if Black is only in charge of your second order desires, right? So like he actually, like, because then it actually, like, does that corrupt, like, Frankfurt sense? Like, so Black has a device implanted in your brain, right? And it can control your like, really all second order desires are thoughts. Like, that's all of this is, right? You have thoughts about, like, what you want to desire.
Or just feelings, or
Sure.
or just,
Well, let's hope it's had a higher level of cognition than just feelings.
I think feeling is appropriate for first order, but second order should probably be a little bit deeper.
I think
like
has,
one
in general.
to one. Yeah.
Right? Okay. So what if Black influences your second order desires? So you do in fact want to give to the poor. You want that to be effective. But if you didn't, I guess it's the same problem, but it just pushes it back a level, right? It's just the same problem.
It does. And so, like, the thing is, like, I think that's why I kind of wanted to set aside, like, the problem of causa sui, because we don't choose who we are and what desires we choose.
They're just Black. So it's like all the way back for either. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, once you, like, begin to examine a person, and then begin to just look at, like, the level of actions and second order desires, it makes a lot of sense to me, where it's like, you don't choose who you are, but sometimes you act with respect to second order desires, and sometimes you don't. So it actually makes sense at that level to me. Like,
it really does to me too. Yeah. I just think that, like, you're always, I really apologize. Like, I really hate if I'm being, like, too repetitive here. All I'm saying is that, like, it is always available to you to step back and ask, could this person have done otherwise, in my new modified sense of, like, could this person have overcome determinism plus randomness so that if they didn't want to do it, they actually could not have done it? And it's like, no. So
no, but the thing is, like, sometimes, like, their second order desires do in fact
I know, I'm not denying that.
Yeah, so, but it all comes back to, like the only objection you'd have at that point would be you don't choose who you are.
Yeah, but I think you're, like, are you reading more into my objection than is there? Like, I totally agree. Like, that's available to you when it aligns and when it doesn't. So, like, you're never deeply morally responsible. But, like, this is so, and I don't mean to discount, like, when I call it the shallow end of moral responsibility, I'm not degrading it. Like,
you find it deeply interesting.
Like, that is where all the work has to be done. Yeah, but I don't know if that's, for some reason, Adam's reacting to me as if I'm, like, not saying that.
I don't know. I think like the thing is,
we're
like,
on the same page 100% of the way once I make my clarifying remarks.
That is true. I think, like, the issue is, like, I don't know. I honestly feel like with the Frankfurt, like, papers, we've really, like, pushed back, like, objections to moral responsibility from my perspective back to the objection of not being causa sui. Like, it's kind of pushed back to that.
Isn't that just the other? Are you not being causa sui is just saying that determinism plus randomness is true? That's all it is. You didn't
not quite, right?
Yeah, like, no, it's exactly saying that.
No, I like causa sui. Like, the idea is that, like,
you didn't make yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, like, the thing is, like, but setting that aside, that, like, you didn't make yourself, but now in this context of not making yourself, like,
the shallow sense.
Right? Yeah, is that you're just making the same remark that I've made by different, like, lexicon, right?
All right. Well, I don't know.
I think you want us to be disagreeing more than we are.
No,
he doesn't want to disagree, but he wants to disagree.
Do you get what I'm saying? Like, Adam, those remarks that you just made are all I was saying with my initial remarks. You didn't make yourself. Now we move into all of the messy work. Like, yeah, like that. Yeah, spot on. Like, so we don't have deep moral responsibility because we didn't make ourselves. Which is just to say that determinism plus randomness is true. Now let's get into all of the messy, important, interpersonal, and legal and consequential shallow parts of it. Like, I guess I just have all I'm doing is just saying, like, libertarian ideas of free will is bunk, but compatibilists seem to just kind of like deny that libertarian ideas are conceivable. Like, I'm saying they're false, but we can understand what they mean. So now let's move into the compatibilist notions. So, like, that's why I call myself like a compatibilist asterisk, like, because I just think they come down to like, this is interpersonal work and like consequentialist legal work that we're doing here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I feel like I know where you're coming from, but we still might see it differently at this point.
Okay. I'm not sure how we do.
Do we need to do a follow-up episode on this?
No, I don't think we should. Like, I don't think we need to. Look, right?
Yeah, probably not.
That would be kind of a rather pedantic episode.
Yeah.
What I honestly don't know how we are seeing it differently, though. Can you explain how you think we're seeing it differently?
Yeah, I mean, like,
are you?
I think there's like actually like a distinction. I don't know. You're just gonna say you agree once again, but like your language implies that you don't, like that you don't agree. Like it's like you say that like, okay, you know, we acknowledge with like the objection of causa sui. We say, okay, well, you know, there's determinism plus randomness, and we're not ultimately responsible for, you know, any sort of our, you know, any behavior necessarily.
Here we are, yeah.
Sure. And, you know, at that stage, then you begin to examine, you know, just more responsibility with respect to like interpersonal relationship. But I think like, I don't know, with
and
like
consequences, yeah.
But I almost just wonder like whether this just kind of like broadens my view of it to like where it's like, okay, you don't choose who you are, but
you have the possibility of acting as who you are, something like that.
Yeah, and not always, but then when, you know, actions do align with who you are.
Yeah.
And in fact, you are morally responsible in some, I think, greater sense, like than if, you know, actions simply, you know, if your actions don't align with who you are.
If we disagree, it's in what you mean by greater sense, then.
Yeah, it almost sounded like you meant deep for a second. I'm not sure you did.
Yeah, I don't. All right, we should wrap this up.
I'm not sure. Maybe honestly, because like Adam, you actually did like change my mind about the importance of the hermeneutical point that Frankfurt's making. But like, I don't know. If we disagree, I think it's small.
Probably.
But hopefully you're still enjoying the series, and we'll tune in next time for it.